Welcome back to IGB100. This is week 11 and basically we're still continuing on with the Sidescroller game. Now this week we are going to specifically be looking at some of the goals and objectives related to the progression mechanics of this game. So some of the requirements that you must fill in your own time to be able to progress to, say, the next level. Now hopefully in the interim you have had some time to set up a basic level, perhaps a little bit more complex than what I've got here, but that's up to you. So with regards to the progression mechanics here, there are going to be two requirements that the player must fulfill to be able to progress to the next level. And that's going to be, first of all, picking up some kind of object. In this case it's going to be a gold key to be able to progress to the next zone. The other condition is that the player must have eliminated all the enemies in the zone. So until this happens, the exit trigger will not be activatable by the player. And this is a pretty straightforward system. To get this started, what we first need to do is open up the game manager script, because this is kind of rules pertaining to the global game manager system. And what we want to set up here is first of all a public boolean. So let's just put exit conditions here, and we'll say we want a public boolean. We'll call it gold key, and by default we'll make it false. Now we would also typically do something like this to set up a boolean check to see whether all of the enemies are dead, and if so, make a boolean flag equal true. But we can just check that because we currently have an array of enemies that is already set up for you to be checking if there are new enemies in the scene. And this is really more to accommodate new enemies that spawn, but in this case just simply checking the length of the array will also do the trick. So first of all, to get started here with making some kind of exit condition, I just want you to make a new game object, 3D object cube, and kind of dragging it towards the end of your level, putting it about there. And we'll call this thing the exit trigger, or the door, or the portal, or whatever it is that you have in mind. Just so it's a little bit more distinguishable from the rest of the environment, I just want you to drag this material that we have set up already, called exit, onto that exit trigger. Cool. So this trigger is going to need a script. So we're going to need to make a new script, and we'll call it something like level exit. So make a new C# script, and level exits. So open up that script in Visual Studio, and the first thing we're going to need here is a public string that is simply the next level to load. So if all of our conditions are met, go to this next level name, in a similar fashion to how we navigate between and from the main menu. However, we'll also need something else. We need to put in a public game object that is something that we're going to essentially turn on and off. If the player is touching this trigger and the conditions for exiting the level have not been met, then we want it to be on, and if they've moved away from it, we want it to be turned off. So this is actually going to be a UI element in this case. So we're going to call this a exit requirement text. And this exit requirement text is going to make use of on-trigger events, the first of which will be just underneath update, put a void on trigger stay. And this will use a collider, which will be other objects. And this trigger event is going to make use of our variables that we have stored in Game Manager. So we'll call this, say, exit level conditions. And we first of all want to check that if we are touching the player, So if the other objects transform.tag is equal to player, then we want to do a couple things. First of all, we want to see if our game manager instance, whoops, let's just grab that one from the list, can't spell today, the gold key is equal to true. So if that's true, and our game manager instance dot enemies, aha, so we have a problem here because our current enemies list is not public. So we will need to go and make this public. So go back into your game manager class and make this array public so that we can get access to it within level exit. So going back to this line of code, we should be able to talk about this array's length. And if its length is equal to 0, then let's do something about that. So what we want to do here is obviously load the next scene. We've met the objectives, we've killed all the enemies, we've picked up the key, it's time to move on. But before we do that, we will need to go and add our using Unity Engine .scene management library once again. And that will allow us to basically call scene manager to load the scene that is, I believe, what did we call that? Next level? Ah, that's not a string. Next level. So, load the next level. Otherwise, if we have not met the requirements, then we want that requirement text, which I believe we called, what do we call it? Exit requirement text. That thing, it's a game object. So not necessarily the text that's being displayed, but its instance itself to be displayed. So it gets shown up on the screen. Cool. So that'll work when we run into this trigger and we do or don't have completed the exit level conditions. To make that bit of text disappear, we'll need to set up a onTriggerExit system that's going to use a very similar setup to what we have with the onTriggerStay. So we'll just rename this bit of code to be like hide exit requirements text. But same setup, checking for our player, and if it is our player and the player has exited the trigger, we just want to do one thing, which is to grab this bit here and set it to false. So if we leave this trigger in question, set it to false. So just back inside Unity, drag that script onto your exit trigger, and the next level, if you have a next level already set up, type the name of that in. In this case I don't, so I'm just going to recall the main menu. We, in this case, may have just called it menu, so menu. So once we get to the end, it'll load the menu once again. However, this script is also asking for our exit requirement text, and this is going to be something that we attach to the UI, which is going to be off by default. So what I want you to do here is just grab the UI object, go to game object UI text, and we'll enter something in to begin with. And this will be, you need the gold key and have slain all enemies to proceed. You could probably word that a little bit better, but that's basically the end conditions for this. I'll just make the width of this a little bit bigger so that we can see it all, and reposition it so that it's a little bit more conveniently placed in our UI. We'll put it there and make it central. Just for clarity's sake, I might make it yellow. There we go. So that's what we're going to see when we run into that trigger. And we might rename it something else as well. We'll call that exit requirement text. And finally, with our exit trigger selected, just drag that text into that empty game object section. So with that text selected in there, you also want to, by default, disable this text, the exit requirement text. So just untick it while you have it selected in the inspector view. Cool. So the next thing we need is the gold key. We have the enemies, we can kill them, that condition will be met, but our gold key doesn't actually exist. This is going to be a very simple bit of code. All it's going to do is check for a gold key that our player is going to check for, that it runs into it within the world, and it's going to set that game manager flag to equal true. So to set this up, go to prefabs and go to gold key. We actually have already made this for you. Again, it's a very simple game object, nothing too fancy here. We can trust that you'll be able to do it yourself anyway. So go back to your level. Let's maybe just, for clarity's sake, put it right in front of the exit so you can't miss the damn thing. And within your player script, so go to the player script, and all the way down the bottom, we'll need to make some kind of event that occurs when we run into this gold key. And that's going to be in the form of a similar on-trigger event to what we've been dealing with just before, which will be a void on trigger enter. It's going to use a collider parameter called other object. Comment here will be pickup gold key. Conditional checking to see if the other object dot transform dot tag in this case will be something like gold key, which I believe I've set up for you already, so that should be good to go. We'll just double check that actually. Gold key tag, so that's good. So what we want to do here is talk to game manager, say its instance dot gold key variable is simply true. We've actually incorporated a sound for this, so we're going to instantiate a key sound. Again, something we've already set up for you that you don't need to do again. And we'll spawn that at our player's position in rotation. And finally, we do want to destroy this key. So we want to destroy other object dot game object. So remove the key from the world. Okay. So we can actually test this out right now. There are a couple of elements that we're going to add to this just to make sure everything is working fine. But just to test this, go back to your exit trigger and make sure it's a trigger. It is a trigger after all. And what we might do is, just for the time being, move this key out of the way so we can't actually access it. So just pretend that it's hidden, or you need to search for it correctly. If we go through the game now and just quickly kill these slimes, so that's one dead, that's two dead. So technically we have no enemies remaining right now, but we go to our trigger, it'll tell us that we still need the gold key and have slain all enemies to proceed. So we know that part of it's working correctly. If I now just move my key down and let my player pick it up, if we hit the trigger now, we should be able to progress to the next level. In this case, it's the main menu. Let's see how that works. Cool. We know that's working correctly. So that's great. But we currently don't have any feedback regarding what on earth we're supposed to be doing here. Especially when we say pick up the gold key, we don't know that we have the gold key. Or we don't know that we need to kill all the enemies. How many of them are there left? If there are 100 enemies on screen and we only know that we need to kill them all, how do we know how many are left? So what we should do is provide some kind of additional feedback for the player. And this is just going to come from some simple UI elements. The first of which is going to be some indicator that we have or have not picked up the gold key. So targeting your UI, just go to Game Object UI Raw Image. And that'll put this big ugly white thing across the whole game. Let's fix that by targeting the raw image as texture and just selecting gold key. Cool. So basically that's where it's going to be. I might just quickly resize that because that's kind of large to 0.5, and I'm just going to plonk that pretty much well there. So it's not the best image, you can kind of see it's outlined a little bit, but it will do for now. I'll rename this raw image to be something straightforward like the gold key icon. And all that's going to happen here is when we run into the gold key, it's going to turn on in a very similar way that that text that we have with the trigger, the level exit trigger association, is just going to turn on and off. So by default, we'll turn that off. And what's going to happen is in our player script, we're going to need some kind of UI reference. So we already have a single UI variable set up here. Let's make another one, and we'll call it a public game object gold key UI. Something like that. And all that's going to happen is when you pick up that gold key, you're going to set the gold key.ui to true. Done deal. You only pick up the gold key once, so this will only happen once anyway. We can actually test this quite simply. If we just go back into our game, I might move the gold key a little bit closer to our player so we can just pick it up immediately. But more importantly, make sure the player, as in your player object, understands where that gold key UI is coming from. So drag that gold key UI game object in. If you press play now, when you pick up that key, that icon should appear. So there's basic visual feedback of what the heck you're doing. That's great. In addition to this, we should also add something regarding how many enemies are left in the game world. So what I might get you to do is, again, targeting the UI, just go to Game Object UI Text. We'll rename this to something like Enemies Remaining. And by default, we'll just give it some text, Enemies Remaining, :X or question mark, or might recolor it because it is a little bit hard to see, and just position that somewhere appropriate in your UI. Now, because enemies remaining isn't directly connected to the player, we're going to need to attach this UI feedback to somewhere more global, and that is going to have to be within Game Manager. So for this to work, we need to set up a bit of text that gives us that reference to that UI element. And this is not an object that we're turning on and off. This is something that we're getting constant feedback from, so we can't just refer to it as a game object. We actually need to think of it as a text element. So what we want here is we'll just put it under here because it is related to the number of enemies remaining. We'll call for a public text enemies remaining, and that will need to be set up elsewhere in the text. We'll just put it here because, again, this is a pretty simple and straightforward segment of code. It's just going to be enemies remaining dot text equals enemies remaining colon space plus enemies dot length. Cool. So go back into Unity, make sure your game manager script attached to your game manager object understands what this enemy's remaining text is. In this case, just drag it into here and run the game. It says enemies remaining 3. Pick up a key now and start killing enemies. It should start going down. Perfect. So that's really all we're going to provide you for the framework for this game. This system should be enough for you to start prototyping a system where you have ever-increasing difficulty levels, more interesting environments, and honestly, more interesting elements for completing the level. And you will need to adjust some scripts for that, but that's entirely up to you. What we would like you to start thinking about now is the layout of your levels and how these interesting elements can start interacting. So positioning of enemies, triggers being hidden or only accessible through certain mechanics or jumps that you need to perform, maybe even things like jump pads to actually access them more appropriately. Something else you should definitely consider is using the Unity Asset Store to set up a more interesting looking environment. And basically this setting is one that we had prepared a little bit earlier in the semester that you can certainly replicate. It's a little bit cartoony, but it does the job, and it definitely makes the environment a lot more interesting to look at. So do check out the Unity Asset Store and get some of those free assets into your game as well. Definitely take some time here to craft the world to the aesthetic appeal that you have intended.